everyone. Buongiorno. Good morning. Hey, we just have the bells here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here in such a wonderful, sunny morning. I know it's very tempting on a Saturday morning, so thank you for being here. This is the Online Abuse When Newsrooms Fight Back. My name is Elizabeth Cantench, and I'm the Executive Director at the ACOS Alliance. We are a coalition of more than 130 news organizations, press freedom organizations, freelance associations working together to champion safety best practices for freelance and local journalists. And our mission is to create a culture of safety. Victoria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Is this working? No? Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Vilk. I'm the Director for Digital Safety and Free Expression at PEN America. We are a nonprofit that celebrates and defends the written word in the US and around the world, and we've been around for about 100 years. And I run all of our work on digital safety and online abuse defense, which is why we're here.
And I'm Elodie Vial. I work with Victoria and her team at PEN America. I have a journalistic background, and I'm a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, working on online harassment of journalists.
Great. Can we have a very quick show of hands? How many freelancers and journalists we have in this room? Hey, how many editors we have here? Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Brilliant. Yes. Thanks for coming. This is what we're trying to answer today. How do we protect media workers from online abuse and hate while acknowledging the need to grow audiences and engagements? Because that's the reality, right? We want to engage with our audiences, and yet, you know, we need to use social media, and that makes us very vulnerable. How are we going to do this? We've structured this session in 3 parts. The first one is we're going through very key basic concepts and knowledge. Bear with us. Some of you are very proficient on these, but it's important that we come together in kind of like having a common language. The second one would be more interactive. We try to make this as fun as possible for you, and we also want to bring a positive spin to this, and we would like to see how many positive experiences we can, you know, come out from this session. And the third one will be concrete examples of best practice. Okay, I think it's Elodie, you're starting.
Yes, so the first thing is to understand what we're talking about here. When we talk about online harassment, the definition we have at PEN America is online abuse is the repeated or severe targeting of an individual or group online through harmful behaviors. And each word here are important. Severe, it's because it's not just one incident. It's one incident can have very serious consequences, and repeated because it's not just one incident. It's the repetition that creates the harm. And this abuse can come from an individual or a group. What we've observed over the last few years is that these attacks online are incredibly coordinated and synchronized, and the damage for the journalist can be very harmful. So we built at PEN America a glossary of tactics that you can find online on our online harassment field manual. And there's a lot of different tactics, right? But here are a few ones that are very important. First is the hateful speech. And a lot of journalists today are targeted because of their activity, but also because of their identity, ethnicity, race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, disability. A lot of threats as well, and a lot of women journalists in particular receive rape threats. And these attacks are coordinated, and we've observed a rise of gender disinformation, orchestrated campaign, trying to create some disinformation, defamation, and this very coordinated. And we want to also highlight doxing. I don't know if you're familiar with what doxing is, and today this is the biggest threats in terms of online abuse. The harassers gather information, collect information on the journalists. They they scan their social media accounts, and they gather this information and then publish this online with threats and other things. It can be your phone number, your home address, the pictures of your kids, these kind of things. So I've mentioned this, women are mostly targeted, and UNESCO ICFJ published a report 2 years ago. 73% of women respondents say that they experience online violence. And this report showed for the first time the direct connection between this online violence and the physical attack. And this is a very important point that we have to consider. 20% of women say that they were attacked offline in direct connection with the online harassment. And why do we speak about this topic as well? Because this is a direct threat to freedom of expression. This is a direct threat to press freedom, and because this online abuse lead the journalists to self-censorship and deplatform women journalists and marginalized groups that are mostly targeted as well.
Right. So that was the context we were going to provide you. We did that part fast because I think many of you are here because you understand what the problem is. Part of what's so effective about online abuse is that it's made to feel individual, personal, and organic, right? It's just at you. But actually, it's a systemic and coordinated effort to suppress a free press and to drive especially the voices of marginalized reporters out of public discourse and out of the profession, right? And I think newsrooms and the media industry have been a bit slow to recognize that it's not about the individuals, it's not about the personal, it's actually about the kind of whole industry. But they have started realizing that when journalists feel safer, more supported, and more protected, it's actually better for your business, right? They're going to produce better journalism. It's easier to retain and to hire and actually retain talent. And you can also get considerably more diverse audiences if you have a diverse staff, right? So I think there are a lot of good reasons to care about this problem. I think the issue is, right, the question that we're here to talk about today is, what exactly are newsroom leaders supposed to do? It feels like an amorphous, big, difficult, frustrating problem. So what are we supposed to do as newsroom leaders in the face of this? And also, if you are a staff member or a freelancer, what is it that you can ask for and expect and advocate for internally in terms of protection and support? So we actually, the three of us with our colleague Gigi, who can't be here today, pulled together a working group. And it's a bunch of civil society organizations from all over the world that have a lot of experience working with newsrooms and reporters on their safety. You can see some of us on the screen, right? There's PEN, there's CPJ, there's ACOS, IWMF, there's a whole bunch of us, IPI. And we are trying to work on some best practices and some shared standards across the industry for how media organizations can protect and support their people in the face of hate, harassment, and threats. And we're doing this all as part of the Coalition Against Online Violence. There's now 70+ organizations in the Coalition Against Online Violence, which I find incredibly reassuring, because some of us, when we started working on this, there was almost nobody working on this subject, and now there are over 70 organizations around the world that care. And actually, Nadine, our colleague, is going to hand out some cards if you're interested in joining us. So what have we done? So let's go to the next slide. Okay, I know this is a text-heavy slide. I promise you're not going to fall asleep. Well, I can't promise you're not going to fall asleep. Maybe you're tired, but I'm going to try to make sure you don't fall asleep. So we've tried to kind of figure out, we've talked to a lot of institutions, and we've tried to figure out what is kind of like in the cycle, right, of abuse. Don't take this super literally in the sense of literally before something happens, during and after. It's a cycle. A lot of the stuff is happening all at the same time. But some things that are really important to do before you're dealing with a 5-alarm fire, with a massive incident when someone is being mobbed, is the most difficult thing to do is to raise awareness in your institution and shift the culture so people feel safe enough to come forward and tell you that they're having a problem, right? You have to help your people understand that online abuse is something you take seriously, and then they are more likely to come and tell you if they feel like they're under attack or under threat. If they think they're going to get fired when they raise an issue, they're not likely to come and talk to you. We often talk to organizations about trying to assess, like, how bad is this problem at your institution? One of the things I found is when institutions have done some surveys internally, anonymously, they find that like 70 or 80% of their staff is dealing with this, and they thought it was like 10 or 20%. Because people suffer in silence, they think they need to be tough and deal with it alone, so they don't tell anyone what's going on. Creating a task force, right? Instead of, in many institutions, it's some one poor soul who's become everyone's go-to person when they're facing online harassment. It might be the general counsel. It might just be someone who experiences a lot of harassment, and all of their colleagues come and ask them for help, which is just even more of a burden on them, right? So they not only deal with their own harassment, but they're trying to help everyone else. So actually picking a cluster of people who have the skills that you need, whether it's legal, physical safety, psychological safety, editorial, together, so that they're trying to address the problem together, is super important. Developing some policies or protocols, everybody's favorite conversation, right? Putting in writing, like, what can you do for your people when they need help, and what can they expect or ask for? The other thing that we talk a lot about is developing some kind of mechanism internally so people can tell you that they need help. It might be that you just go through your editor or manager, but what if you're dealing with non-consensual intimate imagery and you don't feel comfortable going to tell your manager, who's maybe he's male, maybe you're not, about what you're dealing with? So you need other channels. Maybe it's an email reporting system where you tell people what's happening. Maybe there's HR, but there's got to be somebody that you can go to, and you have to know who you can go to, right, if you have a problem. So that's the kind of before. The during is just, first thing, and this is the thing people forget to do, is just acknowledge that there's harm. Right? Acknowledge that someone might be experiencing harm, might be suffering, and just ask them how they're doing and if they're okay. Check in with them and center the needs of the person who's under attack. Right? Instead of making a bunch of decisions for them, and then they feel even more disempowered, and they already feel disempowered by the abuse that they're experiencing. Offering training. How many of us have actually had training on how to use the internet safely? We all, I know who's raising their hand, right? But it's those of us who do this work, right? But many of us, we use the internet for everything, but no one has ever taught us how to use it safely and how to protect ourselves. So offering your people some training, bolstering your own organization's foundational digital security, offering some support services. Like maybe you have subsidized mental health care because it's an enormous strain on your psychological welfare. Maybe you have a legal counsel someone can talk to if they're trying to understand if the law can help them. It's just some examples. Encouraging peer support. When we talk to people, all the technical cybersecurity stuff, it's really important and it helps. But when we ask people what actually helped them get through online abuse, what they say is being able to talk to their peers who knew what they were going through. And they felt less alone, they felt less isolated, right? They felt like there were people they didn't have to, sometimes in their own families, their friends, they say, well, why can't you just get off the internet? Is it really that big of a deal? When you talk to another reporter who's been through this, you don't have to explain to them anything. You're already on the same page. So creating spaces where people can talk to each other, simple, not expensive, really important. Moderating comments. If you've got comments on your various platforms, you'll probably know that your sources and your reporters are subjected often to horrendous abuse in those comments, and it's actually important to moderate them. And finally, and this is probably the most tricky, the most difficult one, is issue some kind of statement of support. That's not always the right answer, right? That's why you follow the lead of the person under attack. But a handful, just in the last couple of years, we've seen a handful of institutions actually stand up and speak publicly in support of their reporters, and sometimes privately internally, because the power dynamics between a troll mob, right, and one reporter are so uneven. But when the reporter has an institution behind them, that shifts the power dynamic, and it helps someone feel more protected, more safe, less alone. And then finally, it is actually a good idea to check in with people a few weeks or a month after they've experienced something, because sometimes the trauma and the kind of stress comes in later. Right? In the moment, you're full of adrenaline, you think you have everything covered, you're good, and then a month later, when it's passed, is when you actually start to feel the damage. So checking in with people later is a piece that's often forgotten, but important. And then trying to talk a little bit internally about, like, how did that go? How did we handle that? Did we do a good job? Could we do better? How does the person feel that that went? So this is like a very quick whirlwind of the kinds of stuff that's been coming out as we've been talking to a lot of institutions who've tried to develop guidance, tried to work with newsrooms and the media industry to help them navigate this problem. So this is now where we really want your help. The three of us don't like to talk at people. We really like, well, I mean, sometimes we do, but we really like to hear from you. So those of you who have phones, I know you're not normally encouraged to take out your phones, but can you take out your phones and scan the QR code on the screen? We want to hear from you about what are some of the things, because we talked about a lot of things like, which of these things are actually important to you? And which of these things do you feel like, well, that would be nice, but compared to the other stuff I need, you know? So I'll let Elizabeth guide you through this. But let us,
Sure.
Can you guys kind of like put your hand up if did it work? Did the QR code work? You're getting stuff on your phone?
You're
Great.
there? Yes.
And you put in the code, right?
You can do that, or you can go to menti.com and just introduce that number.
Yeah, put the code in.
2770-1166, either or.
I think even the people virtually can do this. I've done it at virtual sessions before. You can scan it on your own computer.
Tell
at
us
home.
when you're there. Just put your hands up. So
when you're there, yeah. Okay, we've got some people.
We
We're
got
working
you?
through it. Okay, I see thumbs up. We're getting there.
Okay, so we're going to go here. And, we already have some answers from you. Amazing. We wanted to walk through these. I mean, actually, what is in here is very much what Victoria has walking us through, right? And of course, everything here is important. We're not saying that, we're just trying to have a better sense from you on what is essential for you. What is the must? What is the really things that you would like to see through, before and build from there. We know we're putting you in a very delicate position to have to choose. But maybe that's kind of like forcing you to choose. It's kind of perfect. So you can see results. I mean, this feels like an auction now. Number 1, offer support services. It seems like gaining more and more traction. And what we mean by that, mental health support, access to mental health support, legal counsel, tools, for example, that you can use. We see safety training on the second place, just next to it. Very interesting. I mean, of course, this is shifting because you're all putting data in, so in real time. But the third one consistently seems raising awareness and shifting culture. What it means is acknowledge the harm, right? Make clear and take clear stand that we're taking online abuse seriously at staff meetings, for example, in our communications. Perfect. Moderate content, moderate comments should be here. Create internal task force, right? Having individuals inside of a newsroom designated to do this work, so it doesn't become like something that is ad hoc, right? So you have individuals that are empowered to take this work forward and be kind of like the leaders inside of that newsroom, making sure that these other pieces are in place. We see here again, fifth.
I think it's settled, right? I think it's not moving around. What?
So, develop policies and protocols. Just jump to the 4th place. Upgrade. Well, that means having strategy, right? Having a strategy. And now it's going down. Anyway, so we would like to hear from you. Those of you that have put first, for example, offer support services and offer training. We would like to hear from you why you're putting that on a first place.
I'm also really curious why people put statements of support last.
Exactly.
That's really interesting, right? So I basically just start talking, like raise your hand.
We have some mics.
Yeah. We would love to hear from you about why you chose some of the things that you chose that are priorities.
I actually put issue statement of support like 2nd or 3rd or something, because actually that's something that's missing almost all of the time. I've hardly ever seen it happen, and it would be just so super important when there's like an online mob going after you that there's actual public support. And it can come from your peers as well. Like, people can support you on your Twitter timeline or wherever it's happening. They can say, like, you're doing great job, don't let them shut you up, sort of thing. But it would be super important to get that from the employer. And especially in the case of freelance journalists, I have never seen this happen.
Yes.
I've seen it happen like 3 or 4 times, and I've been doing this for years, but it's really rare. I'm curious, folks who didn't think that, like, is anyone comfortable talking about why they might have mixed feelings about statements of support? Yeah, Rowan, can you?
Rowan Daman from Arij. We don't recommend this at all because it means for us more troubles. So we, based on the survivors, recommendation and the peers, we never do it. It means more and more you will be under attack from others. And it's also a social thing coming from the MENA region. In some Arab countries, this is extremely difficult for the female journalist, for her family, and many things. So we never do it.
Can I say, I think there is a difference between not doing it from an informed position because it creates harm and not doing it because of indifference or because you're trying to ignore that there is a problem. So, of course, if that's going to create more harm, why would you go there, right?
Yeah, and part of it is actually knowing your region, knowing the country that you're in, knowing what patterns and trends are. And also, this is why we talk so much about centering the needs of the person. I mean, we've worked with people who are like, I don't want anyone to talk about this. I want it to go away. I don't want another wave of abuse. And we've worked with other people who are like, all I want is to make I want people to make noise. I want to make noise. And both are okay, but you don't know if you don't ask. And so I really appreciate both of your input.
So making the choices was very hard.
Oh,
sorry. But I think for me, I thought a little bit about it in terms of timeline and when the abuse happens. So in terms of thinking about it before, during, and after, for me, everything has to start with policies and protocols, and then everything can flow from there. So you can have a protocol in place for when you issue a statement of support. That's informed by it. And then in terms of the statements of support, I think the organization has to be resourced to deal with the lashback that could come from it. Who's going to moderate the comments that come from the statement of support?
Yeah.
But Jamil, I think it comes back to having a strategy, having those policies and protocols, having that clarity, that awareness. It underpins having those protocols in place.
If you put something in one of the top 3, no, go ahead. I saw your hand.
Yes.
Come on.
I just wanted to ask.
Yeah.
The editor.
Sorry, it's also for the folks online so they can hear you. Yeah.
Jerry Arnold, the Canadian Press, Toronto. I just want to know if there's anybody here who's actually had a successful strategy that substantially moved the needle for the better by implementing, point 1, point 2, point 3, whatever that might be.
Yes.
And because we have not.
Yeah.
Now
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
that.
we'll go back to Jamila, but also we're going to share a little bit later some concrete examples of institutions that collectively we in the coalition have worked with to put in place policies and protocols. And it's not like there's a silver bullet, right? You do the things and then you don't stop the abuse from happening a lot of the time. But when people feel bolstered, supported, and protected, they're much more resilient. It's much easier for them to kind of cope, to take time if they need it, etc. So we'll talk more about concrete examples, but we also have someone really wonderful here who can talk a little bit more about it.
I don't want to take up the time from the panel, but I was a risk and security advisor at BuzzFeed and HuffPost, and I can tell you it completely changed how this was handled, built out all of these systems, and it's the thing the staff is most grateful for. Constantly say when we're training new hires on digital safety, on online harassment, tell me, you're the first person that's taken this seriously. Thank you so much. Leaving this is the feedback. Will make your staff so grateful, and it does reduce the abuse and it does reduce the harm. So if you want to talk to me afterwards, and I can walk you through what we did that worked, but it can be done, and it makes a huge difference.
I can't recommend highly enough talking to Jamila about this, because she's really, like, what she's been able to do at BuzzFeed was really kind of transformative in a lot of ways around this issue and innovative. And we will share some concrete examples with you, promise. We're not just talking in the abstract, because implementation's the hard part, right? It's good to talk about principles and best practices, but like, what are you actually doing? The other thing I do want to say is some of this stuff might feel really resource intensive, but the thing that's completely free is just to tell your people you believe it's a problem and check in on them and see how they're doing and ask them what they need. Like, that doesn't cost money. Obviously, if they tell you they need some things that cost money, then you have to figure out, which of those things is possible and for whom. But sometimes that's actually where people just want to start, and that is also not totally happening across the industry yet. People are still left to deal with this stuff totally on their own, and that's part of the burden and the hard part. Can we have other? Yeah, thank you so much. I would love to hear from you. Yeah, let's just wait till we get you a mic.
Thank you very much. Is it working? Hi, I'm Mithali Mukherjee. I'm Director of Programs at the Reuters Institute of Journalism. Thank you for picking this up. I have a two-part question, which is not part of your ranking, but is, how do you think about doing this for independent journalists, where in many regions they have neither the kind of amplification nor the kind of support that larger organizations that may reach out to them and sort of use their support and resources for a story do have. Once you've stepped away from that situation, this individual is actually left with a bit of a train wreck and not enough support, to which the question rises, are they part of the newsroom? Are they part of the policy? Are they part of the support that you extend to your newsroom? So I'd love to hear about that. And the second part, just by experience of Global South, sort of echoing a little bit of what's happening in MENA, is that a lot of that they face the same situation online as they do offline, which is that you're a function of how large your audience is. So sometimes what you face is sort of diminished because you don't have access to raising as much public support or notes of support as perhaps a more high-profile journalist would. Of course, I would underline this with saying that in the Global South, very often there are actual, real and physical consequences to the kind of online harassment that they face. So it's sometimes even worse for them. Thank you.
You want to freelance your question? Yeah. I have a lot to say, but you go first.
Of course, what happens with the independent journalists, those that don't have an organization that it's backing them up? I think there are two things here, I would say. Freelancers work, and individual journalists, independent journalists, publish for different outlets. And these outlets, when we talk about safety protocols, we talk about safety protocols for everyone. That's what a culture of safety means. You're not making any exceptions. You're not leaving anyone behind. And our expectation is that when we've been working around these at the newsroom group for the Coalition Against Online Violence, it's always been involving the voices of those that are more vulnerable. Actually, they are the heart of these, right? Those that don't have the individual support. Having said that, also, the coalition has a bunch of resources on their website, and all the different members have quite a lot of work that is meant to be supporting those individual journalists. So there are, places to go for support. What we would like to see is a structural change, and that comes from that institutional awareness, from news organizations, news initiatives, where they see everybody, whether you are one-time freelancer, ongoing freelancer, contractor, right? They see you as part of their work, and everything else, that they have in place would sort of, in a way, be meant to support that individual. So that's what we are aiming for. Yeah.
No, look, there's like the ideal and then there's the reality, right? So like in an ideal world, I think we feel very strongly, and a lot of us in the coalition feel very strongly, that freelancers should receive many of the same protections and support for articles that they're writing. If they're under attack because of what they're writing for you, right? They should have that protection and support. Is that happening? Not really, right? And so I think that's where leaning into civil society organizations that are trying to fill as many gaps as we can, right? Providing individual incident response, free online resources, free training, wherever we can get to freelancers, we try. But I actually think the other thing that I've seen really working is peer support, including transnationally. Like what I've seen really kind of remarkable is when reporters, so many reporters, especially women reporters around the world, are facing exactly the same thing, right? It's almost like an interchangeable playbook that all these like authoritarian leaders have read. And so being able to just talk to each other across borders is super, super helpful. And so I think that's actually part of it is like what professional associations are available to you where you are. Are they supportive? Can you create your own? And how do you connect at conferences and other places with other reporters who know what you're going through and can talk to you? So I hope that helps at least a little bit with your question.
Yes, just plus one to I truly believe in the power of collaboration in journalism. We saw how powerful collaboration can be in this field for investigations, for instance. Forbidden Stories was here, they're presented their investigation, and we can build the same kind of networks for this kind of issue we face. Associations of journalists, unions of journalists as well, they're trying to find out solutions for their members. And during this peer support network, it's not only talking about how difficult it is and how to cope with this mechanism, but what is the advocacy strategy we can set up collectively, for instance, using existing mechanisms like the UN Plan of Action, Safety Plan of Action for journalists, national protection mechanism for journalists, and all these different mechanisms that potentially we can leverage to get support for our peers.
Very briefly, you also talk on and offline. I think there is a great illusion to imagine that what happens online doesn't. And actually, Elodie was giving us some data. 20% of that, based on that study, the threats online jump to our physical threats. It is an illusion. There is, safety is much more complex. There is a psycho-social aspect, there's a legal aspect, there's a physical aspect, there is a digital security aspect. We need to understand in that complexity. Before we jump to the next question, we have one more question. Anyone else wants to add anything before we go to our next? Yes.
So go ahead.
Very, very briefly. Thank you.
Hi, Martin Shelton, Freedom of the Press Foundation. I put raising awareness and shifting culture at the top of my list.
Yeah.
The reason why is because I've been very, very inspired by a single person from an organization reaching out as a security advocate, as a safety advocate on behalf of their colleagues. And they single-handedly pull in collective expertise outside of their organization, bring it inside, influence leadership in order to lead to all of these other outcomes and then strategies and then tactics in order to push back against targeted harassment. So I really, really believe in the power of just a single person to do that raising of awareness and shifting of culture.
That's so important. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to jump to the next question.
It's also on your phones.
Yes. So next, I promise is the last question that we're going to ask you
ask
today.
people if it's easier for people not to have to take their phones out again. Like you could just if you wanted to, you could just raise your hand and tell us some of what.
So what does your newsroom do to support your online safety? So we talk about these are all the things that need to happen, but what is actually happening? What are you experiencing? None of these? It's fine, you can say that. None of these is happening, or I only had access to safety training, or I only had. It's absolutely fine.
And if you're not at a newsroom, right, if you work for a civil society organization or another aspect of the media industry, what have you seen an institution do that you actually thought was oh, that's smart, that was a good idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry, we're going to give you a mic in just a minute. There's someone coming.
Hi, my name is Ray Caputo. I'm a professor and I guess still a broadcast journalist, but because I was a broadcast journalist, I think that my situation was unique. The radio industry for the past 20, 25 years is consolidated. So what they do is they just find they're not really innovating, but they're making money through cutting costs. And I've worked for many organizations where I've seen people just one after the other get walked out the door, including HR people. And at my last job, you know, it was through the election and COVID, and I was the lead morning news anchor and deciding the news. And really, there wasn't anybody around. They had a number to call. And, you know, I was experiencing abuse, and twice I called that number. And about 8 minutes into the conversation, I got hung up on and tried to call the number back, and the line was busy and never got a hold of them again.
Oh my God.
The thing is that it's not, I'm not sure if there was a conspiracy or they just didn't want to talk to me anymore, but the point is in broadcast journalism, because of that consolidation, we're moving in the wrong direction with this, and it was a pretty tough time. So I just wanted to share that story as to how broadcast journalism, say print journalism, may be experiencing this problem a little differently.
Differently. Thanks for sharing.
Well, there's
that.
also, I mean, broadcast journalists have so much visibility, right? Like if they're on screen or if they're on the radio, they have a lot of visibility, so they get extra kind of attention. First of all, thank you for sharing that with us. And I mean, the worst thing you could possibly do is create some kind of channel where people can tell you they need help and then not respond. Or not offer them any. It's like people put themselves out there and they go to ask for help, which is hard, and then you get nothing back. So that's an example of a not best practice. I'm curious if folks, and it is, I mean, it's difficult because the industry is contracting in a lot of ways, and so, but not all this stuff is resource intensive. Does anybody have examples of something their institution has done for them, or they've seen an institution do that they thought was good, that actually helped?
We think here interesting results. So
yeah, it is kind of interesting that nobody's raising their hand.
Nadine.
Alarming, but
no? Yes. Okay. It's a bit of a cheat because not a media organization, but I do work for the IWMF, and we did have a little trolling, and so we decided to get the subscription to Delete Me for all of our staff, which for folks who don't know is one of these data scrubbers, so that where people can find information and dox you, this service helps to clean up and make sure that information is not floating around online.
We've done that for our team too, for the same reasons. And I know a lot of institutions that have found services like that extremely helpful, especially if you're in the United States, where we have all these companies that amass your private info and sell it for 5 cents on the internet.
Okay, I just want to comment on the results, and there are several interesting and exciting things here, from safety checklists, personal support, training, peer support. Sadly, I see the word nothing in the middle, which, but we see, escalation protocol, safety training, resiliency training, preemptive safety steps. So it's good to see there is a little bit of a mixture. There are efforts here and there to tackle these. That means there is an awareness that this is something that we need to pay attention to, and of course the nothing is the scary bit in these answers, right? Victoria, should we jump to some examples?
I promised you concrete examples, and I wasn't lying. So we, between a lot of the organizations in the coalition, have worked with quite a few media organizations to help them build policies, protocols, systems. So the IWMF, with some support from Penn, worked quite a lot with the Seattle Times, and I feel like some of what they've done has been really excellent and is very much worth looking into and emulating. They also published all of it, so you can find, I don't know if I actually included, I might have forgotten to include the URL. No, I didn't. I didn't forget to include the URL. You can actually read. This is just a few bullets, but you can read some of what they've done. So first of all, they started. People said policies and protocols. They just created some guidelines, like what do we think this problem is? What is it we can do for you if you need help? What are expectations around this? They provided some training. They actually make space in staff meetings to talk about abuse, and in one-on-ones, especially. They just basically open the door. So if you want to talk about it, you can. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't. They circulated some tips. We talked about Delete Me, thanks to Nadine. they created a way to report, to track what's happening internally. Because actually that helps you see patterns. When I talk to security professionals at media organizations, they've often told me that what is incredibly helpful if they're trying to figure out like how to deal with threats and things like that, is when they can see patterns across the organization. So they might find that the same nut is, crazy person is attacking 3 or 4 of their reporters across the institution. They tightened their comment moderation, which I think had less kind of protections, and created some protocols. And actually, I think sometimes staff need protocols, because if you're experiencing online abuse in the moment, sometimes you have like a fight or flight response. Like you either like want to fight back or you just freeze. And it's really hard to know what exactly are you supposed to do. And so having some just like, you can contact this, here you can ask for these things, you can expect to do this, is a good start. Should we jump? So Seattle Times, how many, Nadine, do you know how many? It's like 100 some people? It's not an enormous newsroom. I mean, this isn't like AP Reuters size institution, and they were able to put this in place. If you go to the next one. Yeah. So Defector, I think it's 20, 25 people, and it's collectively owned. And so, like, again, they're small, and they don't have an enormous amount of resources, but they put some basic stuff in place. You'll start to hear it's the same things over and over again, but this is the stuff that works, which is why these are the kinds of best practices and standards we're trying to pull together, right? One thing they did that I thought was really clever, if someone gets doxxed, like their home address starts circulating online and they don't feel safe in their home, they will put them up in a hotel for a little bit. Often this stuff blows over, right? If it doesn't, then you have to come up with other strategies. But I thought that was really smart. And you can just ask, you can say that you don't feel safe and get that support. And they have various kind of heightened services if you're like really, like those like 3-4 days if you're in the eye of a cyber mob, they give you a bunch of extra additional support. They give people some mental health time if they need it, things like that. These are all really, really useful, right? Like you can see, I'm just flagging some of the really useful stuff.
And it's important to show this example, because we hear a lot in these trainings and when we have this conversation with the newsroom that newsrooms have very limited resources, and they have a lot of constraints and human and financial limitations. And that's what Victoria said previously, that it works even for smaller newsrooms. You can implement some policies and protocols even if you don't have a lot of resources, even if you cannot like hire someone to take care of this, you cannot get a digital safety evangelist within your newsroom. You can still acknowledge and you can still try to implement some of these things. That's what a lot of newsroom, this kind of discussion that we have, and that's why it's important to show this example as well.
Here's another, I think, Bikisa. Nadine, how many people is Bikisa? It's small. Do you remember how big it is? It's like under 20 people, right? And this is kind of the point that we're making, right? So Bikisa created a policy, right? Just like, how do you keep your accounts safe? They help people understand how to do that. Created a checklist for protecting their data. Offered some training for staff on how to protect their data online, and built out support for mental health, right? Actually giving people access, some kind of subsidy or access to mental health care, professional mental health care, huge, huge support. And actually, we can mention this maybe, but if you want some templates for like building protocols for the IWMF launched its newsroom guide, right, that you can find online. And PEN also has a bunch of resources, PEN America, on our field manual against online harassment about how to build some of these policies and protocols, even if you're not working directly with an NGO to help you do that. I think that's probably what do we think? I think you're starting to get the gist, right? This is Radio Free Europe. We're trying to show you some examples in the States, outside the States. Again, it's a lot of the same stuff. They gave them training, right? They created a channel where people can know that they're under attack. One thing I will say in the years that I've been doing this is, Martin pointed this out, it really helps if you have one person on the inside who deeply cares about this, or really believes it's a problem and wants to move the needle, and is willing to like get people in the room, push things along, put things in writing, etc. That's often where we've had the most success and impact as an NGO, is when we've worked with institutions that have that evangelist, that person. But that's not, sometimes you have a cluster of people who feel passionately about that. So they have like an actual person now who is there to kind of, that may not be a job that you just hired to do that. It may be someone who does other things, but just having that evangelist is huge. And they were training, this is actually really cool, they were training editors, right? So they're not just training their staff in self-defense, but they're training people who manage other people about like, how can you be supportive to someone in a way that's actually conducive and helpful. So those are just some examples. I think we've got time for questions.
Yes. I think what we're trying to say is that it can be done, basically. You can be part of the solution and not just part of the problem. That's kind of like what we're getting to. We have 5 minutes for questions. Yes, Rawan. Yeah. I need to rush through these.
I think you can do it, but the problem that it's connected with other problems.
Yeah.
What we are doing in ARI is we discovered that we need to do one-to-one clinics and not this group trainings, because many of the problems came up when it was one-to-one.
Right.
So our model of safety, and Elizabeth know this, physical, digital, mental, legal, and career safety. And we added career safety because many of our journalists are leaving the career. They publish in anonymous names, they get through all of those threats and decide to leave. So digital alone was not enough. We started with this and we found out that it's connected with the physical, mental, legal, and career. And the other mistake we did, we concentrated on editors, journalists. We did not train program people and finance. And at the end, we needed to, because there were serious problems if you are connected to a brand name that is in civil society, human rights defenders, or investigative journalists. So we got a surprise when some of the problems got to people who are not connected with the sensitive content and needed to expand and upscale. We are a small, newsroom with 30 people, but I think this is quite expensive in time, in your mental thinking and planning, not only sources and resources and people.
That's why it's important to embed it completely into what you're doing. So it's not added work. I mean, it's perceived as added work, and it is. I'm not going to lie. It takes extra time and resources. But it becomes part of your viability, your survival, your existential survival. So the moment you embed it into your routines, it becomes kind of like second nature, all these sort of measures that we are trying to put forward. Anyone else? Yes.
I just wanted to say one other thing, and then the point that you made, so we often talk about physical, digital, psychological, legal, but the fact that you added career security is so smart, because that's a lot of what people are genuinely worried about, right? It's like your livelihood, it's your living, it's how you pay your rent, and, So I think that's brilliant. I so appreciate that intervention, and I also really appreciate that you said that you cannot just train and work with the people who are the reporters and editors, because everyone else at the institution has to understand the problem. If they've never experienced it themselves, it's almost impossible to understand just how destructive it can be. So thank you so much for that. Please.
It's not working. Is it working? Yeah, okay. Sorry.
And tell us who you are.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a Hungarian journalist from Direct 36. And we are a small team, but I think we are very good in talking about these problems. But we just don't know how to handle it. The Orbán's government is attacking us constantly. And I don't know what should help. Like, the Hungarian people are very apathetic about these things. And, it's always easier to hate than support. So I just don't know what could help us, like doing Facebook posts more often about this, or raising awareness to our audience. Can you just give me some advice on this?
Yes, you're mentioning should you do an issue of a statement sometimes? This is a point that, yes, Joanna mentioned this. For a lot of newsrooms, some newsrooms in Europe, for instance, I know that in Belgium they did that. They said, we have to stop hiding this topic, and we have to, this is an editorial topic as well, actually. The fact that a lot of journalists are being targeted, if we start documenting the situation, identifying the pattern, we can say that we're under attack here. And some journalists now, they try to cover this as another topic, and to also try to, this afternoon we will have a discussion about distrust in media and the need to develop more media literacy and connections and discussions with your audience, because there is this Reuters Institute study which says that when you have more conversation with your your audience about what we do, what is our work, because a lot of folks, they don't know actually really what journalism is. And then you can try to build trust and so on. So I would say that we don't want to give any advice about you should do a statement now. Maybe we are happy to have a follow-up conversation about a specific situation. And sometimes people want to do a statement and sometimes they don't want. It depends. So sorry for this reply, but we can discuss further depending on the situation you're facing.
I mean, email. Like, honestly, email. Elodie and I, we're happy to talk to you in more detail. I think we're almost out of time, so I'll let Elizabeth wrap up, but we're here. We're here to help.
Okay, I think, yes, we have 1 minute left. So thank you so much, everyone. This was very enlightening. I think, again, we want to put a positive spin on the conversation because it is a tough conversation. But solutions exist. We are working on it. Be part of the solution. Thank you so much for coming. And please don't be shy. Reach out to us. Thank you.